When the skeletal remains of 22 years old, Caitlin Markham were found 2 years after she went missing in a wooded area in rural Cedar Grove, Indiana, 30 miles away from her Fairfield home. Authorities, who were initially racking their brains on what could have happened to her, then began to ask questions on who killed Caitlin Markham. Over the years, detectives did all they could to solve the mystery behind her murder, following every lead. Finally, after 12 years, the Caitlin Markham's cold case has been solved and her killer arrested. Caitlin Helene Markham was born on the 16th of August, 1990 in Hamilton County, Ohio. Growing up, Caitlin Markham would always light up a room with her bubbly personality. Her family members described her as a light who was warm and showed compassion to others. In a documentary about her death, her younger sister, Allie, said, "Caitlin always took care of me. Her bubbly and spirit-free nature made family and friends compare her to a butterfly. She grew up loving everything arts." Caitlin pretty much had her life planned out before college. At 22 years old, she was wrapping up her undergraduate studies from the Art Institute of Cincinnati in Ohio, and she was already engaged to be married. Caitlin, who was saving up money to move to Colorado with her fiancé immediately after marriage, had 2 jobs. She worked at her campus bookstore and at David's Bridal. Sadly, her bright future would not come to stay as horror struck 2 days to her 22nd birthday. Around 9 p.m. at night, on the 13th of August 2011, Caitlin Markham arrived home to her apartment in Fairfield after her work shift was over at the bridal shop. On getting home, she was met with her fiancé, John Carter, who was already there waiting for her return. Later that evening, a friend of Caitlin also came over to hang out with the couple, but she ended up leaving after she sensed the tension between Caitlin and John. The friend noticed that Caitlin seemed quiet. She asked John why the couple were acting weird, and John said it was due to magic mushrooms that he and Caitlin had taken. Later that evening, according to John Carter, he left Caitlin's condo to meet up with some friends for a bonfire at 11 p.m. Caitlin Markham, who stayed back home, was said to have been reportedly annoyed with John Carter for leaving. By the following day, Caitlin Markham had mysteriously vanished overnight from her apartment with no trace. Around 8 p.m., John Carter, who visited her to check if she was okay since she wasn't picking up his calls or replying his messages, called 911 and told the operator that his fiancée had gone missing. John Carter was heard saying, "My fiancée is missing. I can't find her anywhere. I saw her at like 12 o'clock last night. She stays in a house by herself, so I'm really nervous. Her car is still there. I had been trying to get a hold of her and I decided to go by her house and see if she was okay, and her car was still there. She would be at work right now with her car, which is why I'm like really freaking out." Officers from the Fairfield police then began an investigation into the case, searching for leads in Caitlin Markham's disappearance. Days after her disappearance, family, friends, and people who care came out in their hundreds, volunteering to search for Caitlin Markham around her home, her neighborhoods in Fairfield, the Art Institute, and the Tri-County Mall where she worked. But hours turned into days, days into months, and months into years. There was no sign of Caitlin Markham anywhere. Cell phone records showed she sent a final text that Carter reported in the early hours of August 14th, 2011, at 12:52 a.m. Since that moment in time, investigators found no signs of cell phone or credit card activity. The first set of suspects were her family and friends. Since John Carter was the last person to see her alive, the investigators questioned him about the night he saw her last. John told the detectives that the last time he heard from Caitlin was when he was at the bonfire night. He said, few minutes before 1 a.m. Caitlin had texted him a photo she liked that her boss had taken. When asked where he went after the bonfire, he told detectives that around 4 a.m. he went to his home, which he shared with his mother, and fell asleep. The next day, he said he sent Caitlin Markham a good morning text, but he never got a reply. By afternoon, Carter said unlike Caitlin, she still hadn't returned his text. By the end of the day, John claimed to have not heard from her, so he became worried and decided to go to her apartment to check on his fiancée. He said on getting to her house, her car was in the driveway, her dog was inside, but Caitlin was nowhere to be found. He was asked if he and Caitlin had been having issues in their relationship, to which he replied, "Not at all." However, Caitlin's friend, Michelle, faced made a contrast to this. In fact, Michelle had told the media that Caitlin and John had a pretty heated argument just 2 days before her disappearance. According to Michelle, on August 12, 2011, John and Caitlin allegedly got into an argument about money issues. Despite their differences, the couple went to a festival at a nearby church that evening. According to Michelle, John and Caitlin's dispute spilled over onto the occasion. Caitlin eventually became upset and decided to leave the festival early. It's also conceivable that John and Caitlin made up before she disappeared. But as was already said, the couple appeared to be having some tension the next night as well. At Caitlin's condo, a friend chose to leave after getting the impression that the couple preferred to be by themselves. Many people at the time, including Caitlin's family, believed that John Carter had something to do with her disappearance. They disputed John Carter's claim that Caitlin's moody and unusual, quiet behavior on the night her friend came to visit was because he and Caitlin had consumed magic mushrooms. They reasoned that since the friend came over around 15 minutes after Caitlin got home from work, it is not possible that she would start experiencing the effects of the mushrooms that rapidly, even if she had taken them as soon as she entered her condo. Some people, however, have questioned whether Caitlin even consumed the mushrooms in the first place. It seemed odd that she would want to experience the effects of mushrooms if she merely wanted to relax at home after a long day of work. She had just arrived home and was exhausted. The bonfire was another peculiar element of John's story that several people thought was weird. On August 13th, at around 11 p.m., John claimed to have left Caitlin's condo to meet up with friends. He brought along a bag filled with Caitlin's documents, which he intended to burn at the bonfire. John clarified that Caitlin wanted to shred the papers rather than discard them, but she did not have a shredder. He then took the documents instead, intending to destroy them so she wouldn't have to worry about it. Although some people think this is an unusual justification for why he destroyed Caitlin's documents. At first, it didn't seem like too much of a stretch. It's possible that he really was doing Caitlin a favor by removing the papers from her house, because he admitted to the investigators that he frequently ran errands for her. However, some have generally questioned John's alibi. A handful of the friends John claimed to have been with that evening have provided contradictory accounts. Some others even assert that there wasn't even a bonfire that night, even though there was a lot of speculation regarding John. It seems that gradually, the focus of the investigation shifted. John Carter had frequently addressed Caitlin's issue in the media over the years, and he has maintained his denial of any participation in her disappearance. On the 16th of August 2011, 3 days after Caitlin's disappearance, John Carter mentioned being scared and concerned during one of the searches for his fiancée. In his words, he said, "I'm terrified. I'm absolutely terrified. I just want to find Caitlin and celebrate her birthday with her and go to Red Lobster like she was planning." He later stated that Caitlin was strong and would fight her way out if she is somewhere, and is in a worst-case scenario. However, the search for Caitlin came to an end when, after many days, she wouldn't be found. The case went cold for nearly 2 years until on April 7, 2013, when a couple who was reportedly looking for scrap metal came across what appeared to be a grocery bag containing a human jaw and a skull with hair still attached to it. The couple would immediately call 911. In order to identify the remains of the victim, a Franklin County, Indiana coroner, Wanda Lee, used dental records which ultimately confirmed that the remains were Caitlin Markham's. Her death was then ruled a homicide, but her cause of death could not be determined. When the news of her death got to her family, they were unavoidably devastated to find out that she had been a victim of a homicide. They were also not overly shocked by the information. Her family held on to hope that she would be found safe when she first went missing. Their hopes faded as weeks turned into months without any trace of her. They eventually came to the conclusion that Caitlin had been murdered. On April 18, 2013, Caitlin Markham's family and friends gather for a celebration of life at Harbin Park, one of her favorite places. For months later, on the 25th of August 2013, her funeral was held at her alma mater, Fairfield High School. The room was decorated with many bright colors, just the way she would have loved it. Her fiancé, John Carter, was in tears as he spoke in front of the crowd and called Caitlin the love of his life. "We would have had our kiss. We would have had our marriage. We would have had our honeymoon. We would have had our kid. We would have had our life and we would have grown old together, said John Carter. Since Caitlin Markham's remains were found in Indiana, the Indiana State Police joined in the investigation. In the years following the discovery of her remains, Caitlin Markham's family hired a private investigator to look into the case as well. Though the Fairfield Police and Indiana State Police had opened an investigation on the case, Caitlin's family reportedly felt enough resources were not being dedicated to her death. The Caitlin Markham's case grew to garner national attention over the years. In the year 2016, a documentary was made in her honor to celebrate her life. Her family and friends were featured in the one-hour documentary, which was titled, "Taken Too Soon, The Caitlin Markham Story." The documentary also got featured on a syndicated TV show named Crime Watch Daily. On Caitlin Markham's 27th birthday, her family and friends gathered at a Springdale, Ohio movie theater to watch the premiere of the documentary. Her family kept hope alive, believing that the documentary would bring answers to their daughter's murder case. Over the years, many rumors and theories, some fueled by social media, have surfaced as to what happened to Caitlin Markham. One theory stated that she died of a drug overdose, and those with her panic taking her body to Indiana and dumping it on a rural road in Franklin County. Other theories point to family and friends being responsible for her death, including her fiancé, John Carter. After a lot of investigation, sheriff's detective announced that there was a suspect in the case, but a name was not mentioned. However, the arrest of Michael Strauss and his past life prompted speculation about the unsolved homicide of Caitlin Markham at the time. Police say Michael Strauss is responsible for the death of 23-year-old Ellen Week at his Liberty Township home. Michael Strauss was charged with murder after a body believed to be Ellen Week was found in a field on Milliken Road. Ellen Week was also said to have disappeared from her home like Caitlin did. Michael Strauss was considered a suspect in Caitlin Markham's case at the time because there were photos posted online, which featured Michael Strauss, Caitlin Markham, and other friends. These photos suggested that Michael Strauss was an acquaintance of Caitlin Markham. As the investigation progresses, Michael Strauss was never pinned as Caitlin Markham's killer, having exhausted all leads. The reward for information leading to the arrest and conviction of Caitlin Markham's killer grew to $100,000 over the years. But despite the investigation on the case by multiple law enforcement agencies, her case remained unsolved for over a decade. However, there appeared to be a break on the 17th of February 2023 when detectives arrested Jonathan Pomerton, a close friend to Caitlin Markham and a childhood friend to John Carter. Jonathan was arrested at his workplace, and prosecutors say he had lied in an interview in April 2022 during the investigation of Caitlin Markham's cold case. After a search warrant was filed for his home, investigators retrieved some incriminating evidence that suggested he lied in connection to Caitlin's murder. He was later charged with felony and perjury, and his bond was set at $50,000. Markham's father said Pomerton's arrest makes him hopeful, but he remains guarded as the case progresses. A month after Jonathan Pomerton was arrested for perjury, John Carter, Caitlin Markham's fiancé, was apprehended at his workplace as a suspect to her death. Investigators revealed discovering incriminating evidence at his home in Fairfield during a search. These evidence suggested John Carter as the suspect they have been looking for. John Carter appeared in court and pled not guilty. However, Butler County Prosecutor Mike G. Moser revealed new details in court about the discovery of Caitlin's body. He said there were a set of 3 or 4 sharp force wounds to Caitlin's left wrist. According to forensic report, the place where Caitlin Markham's body was ultimately found is probably not where the body was first deposited. During the argument for a high bond, Gia Moser read writings that he said detectives found inside John Carter's mother's home during a recent search warrant. John Carter had lived in his mother's home at the time of Caitlin's death. One of the writings says, "Deep down, I love her. You want to kill her. But I love her. She must die. You can't kill her. Yes, you can. No, yes, how do you talk me into all these things? I'm just that good. But you're bad. I know. How do I kill you? You can't. You're right. About what? Nothing." It was as if John Carter was fighting and conversing with a demon. Other documents revealed in court stated that John Carter suffers from PTSD and depression. John Carter was placed on a $1 million bond, but posted bail on the 4th of April, 2023. He stood in court wearing only an ankle monitor after his $1 million cash bond. He was allowed to face the judge unshackled. His trial date is set for June 2024, and he will remain out of jail during that time. After John Carter was arrested, Caitlin's dad, Dave Markham, said, "Dave thinks John Carter's arrest could mean he and Allie may finally have justice for their daughter and sister's murder." When a clown appeared in front of Marlene Warren's door and presented her with flowers and balloons, she didn't know that the clown was a killer with a gun hidden away in the costume. For over 3 decades, the case of the killer clown remained a mystery to detectives, Florida residents, and true crime enthusiasts all over the world. Marlene Warren was born on the 15th of April, 1950. When she turned 22, she married Michael Warren, who was 19 years old at the time. Marlene already had 2 children from her previous marriage, and Michael appeared to consider her 2 young sons to be his own. The couple grew together, working hard and making a name for themselves. They bought a number of companies, including a used car dealership for Michael. The family was able to maintain a reasonable standard of living because of their several revenue streams. Life for them was like a bed of roses, such that they could afford a 500-square-foot house in Wellington, Florida's upscale Aero Club neighborhood. Each of the homes in this area have their own runway and hangar, which enabled residents to fly their private aircraft whenever they like. The Warrens appeared to have it all, yet this was not the case at all. At his auto dealership in 1983, Michael experienced legal troubles. Customers accused him of fiddling with the odometer, and the authorities arrested him. He was consequently given an 18-month probationary period. By the year 1990, it was widely known that the Warrens were experiencing marital issues. Michael was allegedly having an affair with Sheila Keene, one of his staff. Despite Sheila and Michael's denials to this allegations, Sheila's husband decided to leave her. On May 26, 1990, a white Chrysler LeBaron with no license plate traveled down the street where Michael and Marlene lived. Marlene and a friend were in the kitchen when they saw a clown-costumed person approach the front door with a basket of flowers and balloons. Marlene grew up in a clown-loving family. Her family adored clowns so much that her mother keeps a whole room filled with clown collectibles. She had paintings of clowns that 14-year-old Marlene had created. For the adoration of clowns, Marlene hurried to the front door to welcome her visitor. Her son, Joseph Aarons, who was present at the time, recalled hearing his mother comment, "How pretty." This appeared to have been Marlene's last words, because a short while afterwards, everyone in the house, including Joseph's friends who came visiting, heard a pop sound. At first, they thought the noise was a balloon popping, but then they noticed Marlene tumbling to the ground. Now at alert, everyone sped to the door. The balloons and flowers were left behind as the clown nonchalantly made his way back to the white Chrysler LeBaron. Joseph tried to run after the clown, but he couldn't go as far because he had a cast on his leg. He, however, remembered screaming at the clown to turn around. The clown turned and gave him a wide-eyed brown stare. His face lacked any expression. The clown soon climbed the white LeBaron and sped off. The sole description offered by witnesses was that Marlene had been shot by a clown with brown eyes. Even the gender of the clown was a mystery to them. Joseph and one of his friends had tried to follow the clown in their own car, but they lost track of it. Marlene Warren was rushed to the hospital. It was determined that she had been shot twice in the face at point-blank range. She struggled to survive, but died 2 days later at the hospital. Detectives checked in with Michael Warren, who wasn't home at the time of the incident. Michael had a solid alibi. He got the terrible news while en route to a Miami racetrack with friends. He hastily went back home to offer comfort to the family. When questioned by the detectives, he provided as much information, cooperating with the investigation process. He was soon ruled out as a suspect. The authorities were perplexed. According to a spokesman for the Palm Beach County Sheriff, the killer clown case was the strangest thing he had ever seen in all of his 19 years working as a law enforcement agent. 2 hours after the murder, authorities got a solid tip. A caller who wished to remain unnamed suggested that the police should thoroughly question Michael Warren and Sheila Keene. Before the police could ask her any more questions, she hung up. Sheila Keene was in town at the time of the murder, but Michael was traveling with friends. Sheila claimed to have been at work, but in reality, she was a repo person for Michael's dealership. Her alibi wasn't exactly solid. A few days after Marlene Warren's killer clown case made headlines, 2 employees of the neighborhood costume store named the Spotlight reported a weird experience to the police. They claimed that one woman with chocolate brown hair came up to them just as they were about to lock up the store. She pleaded to be allowed inside. The employees informed her that they were closed and advised her to come back the following day. She, however, was persistent and informed them that she really needed a costume that evening. It was a strange request because it wasn't Halloween. It was almost Labor Day weekend. Regardless, the 2 employees were sympathetic and allowed her enter the store. She was claimed to have bought white makeup, a red nose, white gloves, an orange afro wig, and a clown outfit. Later on in the investigation, the 2 employees selected Sheila Keene from a lineup of photos and declared that they were fairly certain that she was the woman who showed up begging to buy a clown costume. The detective soon looked into the supermarket store that sold the flowers and balloons the clown had brought to Marlene's house. It was discovered that the supermarket was close to Sheila Keene's house at the time. Also, the supermarket staff selected Sheila from a lineup of photos. The white Chrysler LeBaron, the getaway vehicle, came into consideration next. When asked, Michael Warren asserted that he had no knowledge of the vehicle. He claimed only Chevrolets were sold at his dealership, but Payless, his main rival, had a Chrysler LeBaron. Michael and Payless had a history of disagreements, especially over an advertisement that Michael's dealership ran that included the phrase, Payless, and was purported to be an attempt to confuse buyers. One time, a client from outside the area rented a white Chrysler LeBaron from Payless. The customer searched up Payless' number when it was time to return the car, but ended up contacting Michael's dealership instead. The client said they were instructed to park the vehicle outside the dealership with the keys inside the sun visor. The LeBaron, however, later vanished. After the murder, the getaway vehicle used by the clown was abandoned in a grocery store parking lot. During their search, police discovered orange synthetic threads in the vehicle that resembled a clown wig strands. They also discovered brown long hairs. Sheila Keene had long brown hair at the time of the murder. The police found more orange fake hair strands inside her residence during a search warrant. At this point, everything seemed like a simple situation to resolve. But that wasn't the case. Michael and Sheila vehemently denied being involved in Marlene's murder. They refuted having a conversation with the police without the presence of a lawyer. DNA testing was just getting started in 1990, so the investigators' available evidence was circumstantial. The investigation into Marlene's murder was abandoned, but Michael's legal issues intensified. During the course of the investigation into the murder, Michael's unlawful business dealings came to light. Police discovered proof of additional odometer tampering and consumer overcharging. Following the arrest of an employee, Michael surrendered himself to the police. In 1992, Michael's case went to trial, and he was sentenced to 4 years in prison. After being released in 2002, Michael married Sheila Keene a few years later. The couple started a new life in Tennessee by operating a restaurant. Sheila changed her name to Debbie and informed the community that it was a childhood nickname. Michael must be a good businessman because his new restaurant was a success. The couple's success allowed them to settle in Heron Point, a posh neighborhood close to the Virginia-Tennessee border. They made lots of friends and fit in well with their new neighbors. Few locals were familiar with their history. Michael told their new community that he has owned restaurants since he was a teenager. Marlene Warren's demise benefited Michael as well. He was the beneficiary of Marlene's life insurance policy, not her son. He took over $50,000 from Marlene's family, leaving them with virtually nothing. Detectives had their suspicions, but there was no concrete proof on ground. Michael and Sheila were immediately suspected of the crime, but a grand jury was never convened to that effect. Earlier in the investigation, the police were informed by Michael's acquaintances that they had seen arguments between him and Marlene, and that Marlene had questioned Sheila about her and Michael's affair. Above all, they claimed Michael didn't seem overly saddened by Marlene's passing. Detectives knew they merely needed to fit the puzzle pieces together, because there were many of them. DNA was the case's linchpin. Police took blood and hair samples from Sheila in 1990, but they lacked the equipment to analyze them. Over 25 years passed as the samples rested in a cooler. Police were able to reactivate Marlene Warren's cold case in 2013, thanks to a federal grant they were able to obtain. They had previously tried DNA testing, but the results were inconclusive. Fortunately, technology has improved and produced sufficient evidence to charge Sheila for Marlene's murder. In September 2017, Michael and Sheila were stopped by authorities 5 minutes away from their home. They were unaware that Marlene Warren's cold case had been reopened. 27 years after the murder, the police informed them that an arrest warrant had been issued for Sheila Keene Warren. Michael Warren still maintains that neither he nor Sheila are involved. In an interview, when questioned if he was involved in the killing of his first wife, Michael replied with, "Definitely not." He further said he wouldn't have been with Sheila if he thought she had anything to do with Marlene's murder. A lawyer named Christopher DeSantis told detectives about a fascinating chat he had with Michael Warren before Marlene was killed. DeSantis claimed that Michael had questioned him about what would happen, theoretically speaking, if a husband murdered his wife. He recalled telling Michael that the husband would escape punishment if a friend of his committed the murder, and there was no way to connect the husband to the friend. Intriguingly, DeSantis also recalled telling Michael that if someone was dressed as a clown, they would get away with it because it would be impossible to identify them. Despite this, the evidence isn't sufficient for the police to accuse Michael Warren of killing his wife Marlene. Marlene's son Joseph Aarons, who was a teenager at the time of his mother's death, remembered it as one of the worst days of his life. He expressed his desire for justice in an interview, but he would not specify whether he thought Michael was somehow involved in his mother's death. Sheila was locked away for 5 years before her trial commenced. During those times, she and Michael's love endured. They wrote each other several letters. After trial, Sheila Keene pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and was given 12 years in prison. Between 1996 and 1997, 3 young women vanished one after another in the affluent suburb of Claremont, Perth. Sarah Spears, Jane Rimmer, and Sierra Glennon, aged 18, 23, and 27 respectively, disappeared without a trace, sparking a mystery that would soon reveal a much darker truth. The question arose, were these disappearances connected? What really happened to these young women? Claremont, situated in the western part of Perth, is bordered by Airline Street to the south, Alfred Road to the north, Lock Street and Bay Road to the east, and Stirling Highway, Congdon Street, and Stirling Road to the west. While predominantly residential, Claremont also boasts a prominent shopping center along Stirling Highway and the Claremont Showground in the eastern part of Lake Claremont. Additionally, the Claremont Showground and Claremont Oval, home to the Lake Claremont Football Club, can be found here. Stirling Highway is home to a bustling commercial district, particularly in the St. Quintins Avenue area, where various bars are also located. Notably, the Claremont Hotel on the Terrace and the Bayview Hotel are prominent establishments in the area. It is at the Bayview Hotel where one of Australia's most chilling cases unfolded between 1996 and 1997. Sarah Spears, born on September 12, 1977, grew up in a rural area of Western Australia. Her father, Don Spears, worked as a shearing contractor based in Darkin, a town in the state's wheat belt. When their children reached high school age, the Spears, like many other rural families, sent them to boarding school in Perth. Sarah eventually enrolled in Iona Presentation College, located in Mossman Park. After completing her education, she pursued secretarial school and secured a receptionist position at an engineering firm in Subiaco. In 1996, Jane Rimmer was living in a South Perth flat with her eldest sister, Amanda. They had a close bond, just like Jane had with her parents. Jane was born on October 12, 1972, to Trevor Rimmer and Jenny Rimmer. She grew up in Shenton Park and attended Rosalie Primary School and later Hollywood High School. While studying, She also worked part-time at a nearby deli. Jane had a passion for children, which led her to work as a childcare worker in Netherlands. She even worked as a nanny for a family in Esperance before returning to Netherlands. Tragically, it was during this time that she went missing after a night out with friends at the Continental Hotel on June 9, 1996. Ciara Glennon, born on November 20, 1969, had a different upbringing. She was raised in the affluent suburb of Mosman Park before moving to Perth at a young age. Ciara was born in Zambia to Irish parents, Dennis Glennon and Una Glennon. After graduating from University of Western Australia with degrees in law and Japanese in 1992, she secured a highly sought-after internship at the prestigious legal firm Blake Dawson Waldron. Started working there in early 1993. Described by her father as resourceful, resilient, and strong-willed, Ciara was known for her passion and great sense of humor. On March 15, 1997, she disappeared from Claremont. The backdrop of this case began on January 27, 1996, when Sarah Spears left Club Bayview in Claremont after a fun night out with friends. At 2:06 a.m., she made a call from a public phone booth to request a taxi to Mosman Park. However, when the taxi arrived at 2:09 a.m., Sarah was nowhere to be found. Witnesses reported seeing her waiting alone near the intersection of Sterling Road and Sterling Highway. The following day, there was no word from Sarah to any of her loved ones. This was highly unusual considering her strong bond with family and friends. After Sarah's sister failed to hear from her following the night of January 27, 1996, her family reported her missing, prompting the Major Crime Squad of Western Australia to take on the case. The circumstances surrounding Sarah's disappearance were concerning. She had called for a taxi at 2:06 a.m., but by the time the taxi arrived at 2:09 a.m., she was nowhere to be found. What could have transpired in those mere 3 minutes? Within 48 hours of her vanishing, the Major Crime Squad began their investigation into Sarah Spears' case, leaving no stone unturned in their pursuit of leads. They were desperate for any information that could provide an update or shed light on Sarah's disappearance. Unfortunately, their efforts yielded no results. Sarah remained missing, and her case gradually grew cold, leaving the crime department without any leads to follow. There was no physical evidence, no CCTV footage, and not a single reliable witness to provide the authorities with crucial information regarding Sarah Spears' vanishing. However, just 4.5 months later, another young woman went missing from the same area of Claremont. On June 9, 1996, 23-year-old Jane Rimmer, a childcare worker, was last seen at the Continental Hotel in Claremont after a night out with friends. She disappeared while walking home on a street in the vicinity. The Major Crime Squad began to notice a pattern emerging: the disappearances of young women from the Claremont area. This realization prompted them to conduct a thorough investigation within the neighborhood. Jane's family experienced the same distress as Sarah's family when she vanished from Claremont. Like Sarah, Jane had a close relationship with her family and maintained regular contact with them. Even though she had moved out of her parents' house, she maintained a close and loving relationship with them. Every weekend, she would return to her family's home to enjoy Sunday lunch together. Jane's parents adored her, and their affection was evident in her personality. The Major Crime Squad was diligently searching for any potential leads, including eyewitnesses and taxi drivers, may have had contact with or witnessed anything related to the case. Up until August 3, 1996, the disappearance of these two young women remained a perplexing missing persons case in Claremont. However, everything changed when Jane's body was discovered by a family in a wooded area just 40 kilometers away from Claremont on that fateful day. The Van Rolta Evans family stumbled upon the grim sight while driving through the semi-rural land in Wellard, located about 40 kilometers south of Perth. Tammy Van Rolta Evans, the mother, ventured down a bush path while her children played nearby, captivated by the sight of the largest death lily she had ever seen. As she admired the flower, she noticed a pair of feet and, upon further investigation, discovered Jane's naked body concealed behind branches. The Major Crime Squad was immediately notified, and a large team swiftly arrived at the scene, retrieved the body for autopsy, and launched a thorough investigation. The discovery of Jane's body marked a significant turning point in the case. In the hopes of finding any clues that could lead to the killer, the area where her body was found underwent meticulous examination. Detective Paul Ferguson, who was leading the case at the time, expressed optimism that these findings might provide valuable information in locating Sarah. Pathwest pathologist Clive Cook confirmed that Jane's death was indeed a murder, as a deep wound from a sharp object was discovered on her throat, along with defensive wounds indicating that she had fought back against her assailant. Furthermore, despite the severe decomposition of the body, the forensic department could not find any evidence of sexual assault. To investigate the case, the Western Australian Police formed the Macro Task Force. They found a telecom knife less than a kilometer away from the crime scene on Woolcote Road, which turned out to be the murder weapon. On the night Jane was killed, two couples residing in Wellard reported hearing a lady screaming and shouting. Kenneth Mitchell claimed to have seen a car driving off in the direction where Miss Rimmer's body was found after hearing the lady yell, "Leave me alone. Let me out of here." Another couple in the same area remembered hearing cries that abruptly stopped. All these witnesses, evidence, and forensic results pointed towards the use of a sharp tool, most likely a knife, in the murder. However, the evidence didn't confirm the murder weapon yet. Fast forward to March 15, 1997, 9 months after Jane Rimmer's disappearance, another young woman named Sierra Glennon, age 27, went missing from the same area in Claremont while heading home. The Macro Task Force immediately took over the missing persons case. Sierra's father, Dennis Glennon, made an emotional appeal for help to find his daughter, stating that she would fight back due to her upbringing. On April 3, 1997, the body of 27-year-old lawyer Sierra Glennon was discovered partially buried in undergrowth in a bushland area north of Perth, near Pippedini Road in Eglinton, just 19 days after her disappearance. The discovery of Ms. Glennon's body was made through a tiny limestone trail. Former senior pathologist Karen Margolies noted that Ms. Glennon's body was found fully clothed, but her black skirt appeared to have been pushed up around her waist. Sierra Glennon, adorned with an array of jewelry, including a gleaming gold chain bracelet, earrings, a watch, and even a navel ring, met a tragic end. Her life was abruptly halted when an unknown object struck her skull, leaving her momentarily stunned. The wound on her throat mirrored that of Jane Rimmer, connecting the two cases. Forensic analysis revealed that fibers found on both Miss Glennon and Miss Rimmer were identical, further strengthening the link. Additionally, DNA discovered beneath Sierra's fingernails was believed to belong to the killer. Her battered skin and cracked thumbnail hinted at a valiant attempt to defend herself against her assailant. Shocking photographs of the crime scene unveiled a chilling sight: damaged trees with severed branches serving as a macabre burial ground for Miss Glennon. As the investigation unfolded, it became evident that Sierra's disappearance was the handiwork of the same culprit. The Macro Task Force, now driven by desperation, was determined to apprehend the perpetrator and prevent another tragedy. Among the primary suspects, Lance Williams stood out. The task force closely monitored his movements as he aimlessly roamed the streets of Claremont in his car on a Sunday afternoon. His peculiar behaviors, such as driving around past midnight and circling the Claremont region multiple times, raised suspicion. Moreover, his tendency to offer women rides added a disturbingly sexual element to the case. As the media and news agencies swarmed around him, Lance faced direct questions. He vehemently denied being the serial killer, but readily admitted his innocence. The police were curious to know how Lance Williams' life had changed since he became a prime suspect in the Claremont serial killings. He admitted that it had been a distressing time for him and his family. However, despite their doubts, the police realized that Lance was not the man they were looking for. Their attention then turned to Perth's taxi drivers, as the women were last seen in situations where they may have taken taxis. One driver claimed to have picked up Sarah the night before she disappeared. To eliminate suspects, all registered taxi drivers in Western Australia underwent extensive fingerprint and DNA examinations. As a result, stricter criteria were implemented and licenses were revoked for 78 drivers with criminal histories. The police searched tirelessly for months, but unfortunately they found no concrete evidence to lead them in the right direction. In 2004, after 7 years of unsuccessful investigations, the police considered disbanding the Macro Task Force. However, they decided to wait for an independent review of the case before making a final decision. The review involved experts from Australia, the UK, and a psychological profiler. Would this review provide the breakthrough they desperately needed, or would the case eventually fade away after years of investigation? The Special Task Force, with the help of the country's top forensic experts, made a breakthrough in the case when they discovered a crucial piece of evidence. In 2008, they analyzed a sample from Glennon's fingernails using the Western Australia database and found a match with a victim who had been assaulted and left alive at a cemetery in 1995. This revelation, along with the fact that the experts had access to all the evidence, including blue polyester fibers found on the deceased, provided them with a clear direction to follow. Professor Barkley, the forensic expert on the task force, explained that their goal was to search for connections between previous cases in the Western Australia police database and the Claremont murders. This review was crucial in uncovering new leads and evidence that had previously been overlooked. The discovery of male DNA beneath Ms. Glennon's fingernails was a major breakthrough in the Claremont case after 12 years. Scientists in a specialized London facility utilized an advanced technique called low copy number analysis, which was not available in Perth at the time, to identify the DNA in 2008. Brendan Chapman, a forensic scientist in Perth and former crime scene investigator, revealed that they used a procedure called polymerase chain reaction to amplify the DNA for more detailed analysis, as they lacked the sensitivity to identify a single copy of DNA. This amplification process resulted in obtaining a DNA profile. In a surprising twist, the DNA sample matched DNA obtained from a teenager who had been kidnapped and assaulted in a park in Claremont's Karrakatta Cemetery in 1995, a year before the killings began. Now they had the suspect's DNA. Detectives meticulously examined cold cases to determine if the murderer had been involved in any previous crimes. In 1988, a horrifying incident took place in a quiet Huntingdale house in southeast Perth. A young 18-year-old girl was attacked while she lay in her bed. This sent shockwaves through the community. The intruder, startled by the girl's cries for help, fled the scene, leaving behind a stolen kimono from a nearby clothing line. Authorities were determined to solve this unsettling case and connect it to another similar attack. They meticulously analyzed a fingerprint collected from the doorknob of the Huntingdale property, which had been preserved since 1998. It was a crucial piece of evidence that would lead them closer to the truth. In 2008, the fingerprints were matched to a man named Bradley Robert Edwards, who had a previous record of attacking a hospital employee in 1990. This faceless man who had brought tragedy to the innocent souls of Claremont was none other than Bradley Robert Edwards himself. It was a chilling revelation. Growing up in Huntingdale with his parents, younger brother, and sister, Bradley followed in his father's footsteps and worked as a technician at Telstra throughout his professional career. However, beneath the surface, a darker side of Bradley emerged. He became a peeping Tom, starting with stealing undergarments, a disturbing habit that would escalate over time. Bradley's first encounter with the law occurred before he got married. While working on a Telstra project at Hollywood Hospital, he attacked a woman named Wendy Davis in 1980. Approaching her desk under the pretense of needing to use the restroom, Bradley suddenly grabbed Wendy from behind and forcefully pulled her towards the restrooms. Wendy fought back, delivering a powerful kick to her assailant. Surprisingly, Bradley apologized and released her. The police swiftly arrived and arrested Bradley, leading to a court order for him to undergo therapy for 12 months. Despite this incident, Bradley managed to keep his position at Telstra and even received a promotion shortly after. He cited his fiancée's pressure to get married as the reason behind his actions at the time. They tied the knot shortly thereafter. Bradley, at a young age, settled down in a location close to his parents' home in Huntingdale. However, their marriage didn't stand the test of time. Bradley's wife felt neglected due to his excessive focus on his computer. Eventually, she started dating a male friend who moved in to assist with their expenses. In 1996, she left the house with her new boyfriend. Around the same time, Sarah Spears mysteriously disappeared. A few months later, Bradley's ex-wife contacted him to inform him that she was pregnant with her new partner's child. Shortly after that, Jane Rimmer went missing. Sierra's murder occurred when Bradley ended his relationship with a woman he had been seeing in early 1997. The discovery of significant DNA matches prompted an undercover operation to collect Edwards' DNA. During a visit to the movies, he left an empty Sprite bottle outside the theater, which the police swiftly seized for DNA analysis. The DNA taken from the bottle was found to match the unknown male's DNA profile found under Sierra's fingernails, providing the crucial evidence the police needed. Bradley Robert Edwards, aged 52, was arrested on December 22, 2016, and 3 years later his trial commenced. Due to the high-profile nature of the case and the disturbing evidence involved, the prosecution requested a judge-alone trial, which was granted on November 25, 2019, with Judge Stephen Hall presiding over the murder trial in the Supreme Court. While the defense argued that the evidence had been compromised in the lab, it was undeniable that Bradley's DNA was found under Chiara's fingernails and matched the stolen kimono he left at the crime scene. The Telstra work vans played a crucial role as key pieces of evidence. Edwards, a technician at the time, was accused of committing the offenses using corporate vehicles after hours. A security guard who frequently witnessed the telecom van stopping at the Karrakatta graveyard without any apparent reason, both before Spears' 1996 disappearance and after the 1997 incident, confirmed this. Carmel Barbagallo, the prosecutor, presented evidence from a period between 1995 and 1997 where a man driving a Telstra station wagon would approach women and offer them rides. This evidence was submitted as part of the Telstra Living Witness Project case. The fact that the blue polyester fibers found at the crime scene on the bodies of Jane and Sierra matched the Telstra station wagon owned by Bradley further solidified his direct connection to the murders. From April 1996 to December 1998, Edwards operated a Telstra-branded white VS Series van, which was located and seized on the day of his arrest. The defense argued that these fibers could have come from another source or vehicle not listed in the Western Australia crime database. However, it was revealed during the hearing that the carpet fibers found in the back of Edwards' car matched those found on both Rimmer's and Glennon's bodies. Bradley's defense team claimed that Ms. Glennon's fingernail samples, taken throughout the inquiry, were contaminated due to Bradley's DNA being present in the lab since the 1995 assault. Attorney Paul Jovic cross-examined several scientists from Perth's Path West facility, where the DNA was tested, regarding their procedures. Jovic even speculated that Edwards may have been in the lab. Nevertheless, the prosecutors were able to disprove these arguments with the help of the right witnesses and a series of well-structured pieces of evidence. After 7 months of hearings and over 200 witness depositions, the trial concluded on June 25, 2020. Following the conclusion of the trial, Judge Hall took a moment to gather his thoughts before delivering his decision regarding Bradley's detention. It was a tense moment, as the expiration date of Bradley's time in jail was approaching rapidly on September 24, 2020. Ultimately, Edwards was found guilty of the murders of Jane and Sierra, but not of Sarah Spears. In a lengthy 619-page written verdict, Judge Hall expressed that while it was highly likely that Bradley was involved in Sarah's disappearance, there was not enough evidence to directly link him to the crime. As a result, Bradley was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 40 years, with the date set for December 23, 2020. Judge Hall also acknowledged the grim reality that Edwards may never leave prison alive. The chances of him passing away behind bars were deemed to be quite high. However, despite the severity of Bradley's sentence, it is crucial to delve into the psychology of the criminal. Ms. Barbagallo argued that understanding the timeline of the crimes and Bradley's behavior is essential in comprehending the emotional distress he experienced in his personal life. This timeline was presented in court during the trial. The incident at Hollywood Hospital occurred shortly after Bradley discovered that his ex-girlfriend had been unfaithful to him in the 1980s. In 1994, his first wife began an extramarital affair. Due to Bradley's increasing emotional distance and excessive time spent on his computer. By January or February of 1995, her lover had moved into their marital home. The Karrakatta assault case was reported in the same year, shortly after Sarah Spears' disappearance in 1996. Tragically, just a few days after his wife left him, Jane vanished and was later found murdered. Shortly after this devastating event, Bradley learned that his estranged wife was pregnant with a child, fathered by the same man she had left him for in 1996. In the latter half of 1996, Bradley entered into an intimate relationship with a woman who was significantly older than him. However, this relationship came to an end in March 1997, coinciding with the disappearance and murder of Tiara Glennon. The prosecution argued that no further murders were committed after Bradley met his second wife in April 1997, just 1 month after Kiara's tragic death. Bradley's state of mind during the crimes in Claremont becomes evident when examining this timeline of events. The pain of losing a child is immeasurable, and the parents and family members of the victims endured years of suffering. However, their resilience prevailed as they witnessed justice being served. Despite Sarah Spears' body remaining unfound and Bradley adamantly denying the murder, court recognized him as the perpetrator. Unfortunately, due to a lack of evidence, justice for Sarah's murder could not be fully achieved. Nevertheless, the unwavering dedication of forensic science and the police department in this case shines through, bringing justice to the innocent souls brutally taken by this killer. In a time when faith in our justice system wavers, this case stands as a beacon of hope, reminding us that morality and principles still form the foundation of our system. The skeletal remains of a woman were discovered on December 12, 1994, off Tom Hicken Road in Sugarloaf Township, Luzerne County, Pennsylvania, during a mining reclamation project. A state worker found her, noticing that her skeleton was scattered between the top and bottom of a coal bank. She was found above ground with no signs of burial. A foreign metal fragment was found in her lower jaw. Authorities arrived at the scene and determined that the remains belonged to a female who was approximately 5 feet 1 to 5 feet 4 tall. It was estimated that she was between 34 and 47 years old at the time of her death, which was believed to have occurred between 6 months to 2 years prior to the discovery. Despite extensive efforts, including comparisons and leads, the woman's identity remained a mystery due to the condition of the remains, making it impossible to determine the cause and manner of death. A facial reconstruction was created in 1996 after studying her skull. The sculpture was widely circulated in the media in an attempt to identify her, leading to her being known as Sugarloaf Jane Doe. Unfortunately, the case remained unsolved for years. In 2021, authorities released a computer-generated likeness of the unidentified victim and offered a reward for any information. Thanks to recent advancements in DNA technology and forensic genealogy, a potential relative of the unidentified woman was identified by Othram. Investigators interviewed the relative, obtained an additional DNA sample, and confirmed that she was her sister. In February 2024, after almost 3 decades, state police announced that the unidentified woman was positively identified as Margaret Carol Wininger. She was born on September 5, 1948 in Hazleton, Pennsylvania, and lived with her family in Northeast Philadelphia until she went missing in the early 1990s. Margaret attended West Hazleton High School from 1965 to 1966 and served as a maid of honor at a wedding at Our Lady of Grace Church in 1968. In 1965, her parents went through a divorce and her father had been employed as a greenskeeper at Valley Country Club. Following her high school graduation, her sister enlisted in the Women's Army Corps. Although the identification of Margaret provides some resolution, the investigation into her unfortunate demise remains ongoing. The state police are appealing to anyone who may have had any interaction with her in the Luzerne County region during that period to step forward and share any relevant information. Friday, November 25, 2022, Thanksgiving weekend, 6:58 a.m. Riverside, California, a small cul-de-sac in Price Court. It was a quiet morning that Friday. Most families were still asleep, having enjoyed great food and company the previous evening. Thanksgiving. The weekend for most would be more of the same, eating well, relaxing, and spending time together. Just before 7 a.m., a red Kia Soul parks up in the area and a man wearing a tan-colored trench coat, a black fedora and face mask, carrying a black duffel bag and a plastic bag. Gets out. He walks around the area for a while, standing outside a house for a moment before going back to the car and driving off. He does the same thing twice. One of the neighbors thought it looked so weird. She called the Riverside Police's non-emergency line to report the license plate. But whoever it was hadn't actually done anything, so all they could do was make a note of it. 2 hours later, 9 a.m., Michelle Blandon was just on her way out of the house when she got a call from her mother, Sherry. Sherry was panicked and talking fast. She said that a detective was in the house and wanting to talk to her 15-year-old granddaughter, Michelle's niece. He said something had happened near the school and it was very urgent that he get hold of her. 65-year-old Sherry lived in the home with her husband, 69-year-old Mark, a volunteer high school softball and baseball coach, her daughter, 38-year-old Brooke, and Brooke's 2 young girls. Everyone's minds were racing. Had the teen done something wrong? Was she in trouble? Was he going to take her to the station? Sherry said it was just her and Mark in the house as Brooke had taken her girls out. The officer said he would have to wait until they came home and interview everyone separately. It seemed really serious. Michelle was baffled and worried but reassured her mother it was probably nothing and to try and stay calm. Sherry asked the detective if it was okay for Brooke's other daughter to get dropped off at Michelle's house while they sorted everything out, and he agreed. All everyone could do was wait until the teen came home with Brooke. The detective told Sherry that he needed to talk to the adults first, and the teen would have to wait in the car once she got there, along with both hers and Brooke's phones. Michelle's heart started to beat fast, and the anxious feeling she had was growing. None of this felt right or normal, not even close. Michelle knew her mom wouldn't have opened the door for anyone, let alone let someone in. He was an officer, he had a badge and the authority to go in, and everything would be fine. A few minutes later, Brooke arrived at her house to drop off her niece, and Michelle watched as Brooke and her 15-year-old daughter drove off to Price Court. Michelle called Sherry back and said they were on their way over and asked if everything was okay. Sherry's voice was shaky and she was fighting back tears. She said the detective was still in the house, but before she could say anything else, he took the phone off her. Calming and reassuring, he said, "I'm here with your mom. She is kind of being anxious and freaking out. Everything is going to be okay. It's all okay." He passed the phone back over and Michelle strained to hear what was being said. She heard the detective say, as part of the investigation, that he needed to search the teen's room. The room with the Green Bay Packers memorabilia, he said. Michelle felt sick. How on earth did he know what the inside of her family's house looked like? But before she could say anything to her mother, Sherry said, "I'll call you back," and the line went dead. There was nothing Michelle could do but wait, so she tried to shake it off and headed out into town. Brooke finally pulled up and went inside, her daughter staying in the car as per the officer's instructions. A short while later, Michelle sent a text to her mom asking for an update. She got no reply. 11:08 a.m. 911 dispatchers received a call requesting that a welfare check be carried out at Price Court. A couple of residents were concerned as they had watched a man leaving a house with a much younger girl who was very distressed. She had no shoes on and was subtly trying to mouth words at people watching, although they couldn't tell what she was trying to communicate. The pair walked towards a red Kia Soul which was parked on someone's drive. The same person's drive, in fact, that had reported the car's license plates just a few hours earlier. As the pair approached the car, the owner of the house opened the door and shouted at the man that he couldn't park there. The man was very apologetic and said he was leaving. He opened the back passenger side door and the girl got inside. He then walked around to the back door on the driver's side and put the black duffel bag inside. As he turned around, the neighbor saw some red spots on his clothes, which looked like blood, but she couldn't be sure. Although the girl wasn't physically forced into the car, something was very troubling about the situation. Before the man shut the doors, the girl quietly whispered, "Help me," and the car sped away. Michelle, who was still out in town, then got a Facebook message from a neighbor of her parents. "Please call me ASAP," it read. A few minutes later, more calls came flooding into the Riverside Police Department. A house was on fire at Price Court. It was Mark and Sherry's. Michelle jumped in the car with her husband and they started heading across town. She was calling her mom, dad, and sister repeatedly, but no one was picking up. Price Court, authorities were now there and tackling the blaze. The windows were starting to smash because of the heat and the roof was caving in. As firefighters made it inside, they found the bodies of Mark, Sherry, and Brooke lying closely together near the front door. They all had plastic bags over their heads and were bound and gagged. They were already dead and their neighbors watched in horror as they were pulled from the home. Michelle and her husband pulled up to her parents' house just after this, and Michelle tried to run through the tape as the police dragged her back. Her parents' and sister's cars were still parked outside, and although it was too early to tell who had been inside, soon heard that several bodies had already been carried out. As a shaken Michelle headed to the station with the police, other officers were trying to track down the red Kia. Michelle told them about the strange phone calls that morning and the detective inside her parents' house. She said there was no way the man would have got inside the house without showing some form of ID. Sherry would never have let him in without this, no matter what he said. Police were still not confirming anything, but when Michelle told them about her father's 2 tattoos on each arm, a Green Bay Packers logo on his left and a Notre Dame mascot on his right, she was faced with a situation that she had somehow been trying to rationalize and come up with excuses for. Her mother, father, and sister were inside the house, and her niece was now missing. Despite people wondering if the fire had caused their deaths, an autopsy would later reveal that Mark, Sherry, and Brooke had all likely died of asphyxiation. They had been bound and gagged before plastic bags were put over their heads, and Brooke's throat had been slashed. Mark was killed first, and they could see from the injuries that Brooke had really tried hard to fight off the attacker. 3 of the family's dogs would also die in the fire, along with their pet bird. Their 4th dog, which had been in the backyard at the time, survived and went into a shelter whilst a new home was found. For the small, quiet community and everyone that knew the family, it was impossible to believe that anything like this could happen on their doorsteps. Around the same time all of this was going on, over 2,000 miles away in Virginia, a woman was filing a missing persons report. Her boyfriend of 5 years had taken off, and now she couldn't get hold of him. The couple had been celebrating Thanksgiving together in San Diego for a few days with her parents when he suddenly started packing to leave. He said he had run out of vacation time and needed to drive back to Virginia, where he had just purchased a house. But the drive would take over a day, and this hadn't been their plan. Little did she know he hadn't set off to Virginia. He had set off for Riverside, California, and she would soon realize it was her boyfriend that was now on the run with the missing 15-year-old girl. Using the license plate the neighborhood had previously given them, police in Riverside were finally able to track down the red Kia as it was heading into Kelso, an unincorporated area of San Bernardino County, on a totally empty and rural road far away from anything. They caught up to the car, and a SWAT team and helicopter were in pursuit. The man finally pulled over and jumped out of the car, firing his gun. He showed no signs of backing down. A shootout ensued with the man as the girl ran from the car. In a matter of seconds, the driver was dead and the teen was with the police. Most reports state that he had turned the gun on himself, but some say he was killed by police fire. The 15-year-old, who to this day has never been named, was alive and unharmed. She was taken into protective custody before they began interviewing her. She and her sister also began a lengthy process of trauma counseling, and a GoFundMe raised over $100,000, which would be given to the girls. Upon hearing that she had been found alive, Michelle commended the neighbor for being so diligent in reporting the number plate and for persisting they look into it. She believes it absolutely saved her niece's life. The man who had kidnapped her and killed her family was 28-year-old Austin Lee Edwards, a serving Virginia State Deputy Sheriff. To the authorities' surprise, the teen said she did actually know Austin, having met him online, but he was not the person she thought he was. The pair had started speaking on Omegle, a free online chat site that allows people to socialize with others without the need to register or create an account. The site randomly pairs users in one-on-one chat sessions where they talk anonymously using the names you and stranger. She had been honest about her age, but Austin had told her that he was 17. It is unknown what, if any, pictures he was using or who he was pretending to be. The police couldn't determine how long they had actually been talking for or how he had got hold of her address, but at some point Austin had asked her for photographs that were sexual in nature. She said after this she stopped talking to him. Detectives theorized that maybe he killed her family in retaliation, or he thought that if he kidnapped her, he could stop her from talking to anyone. They also couldn't rule out the possibility that he did have some explicit photos of her. And maybe this was an attempt at sextortion. His messages showed he was clearly obsessed and was going to stop at nothing. But with more than 1 million pages of social media content to go through, it was safe to say the full story would take some time to come to light. The teen told police that morning that she had no idea what was going on as she and Brooke pulled up to the house. She said she had waited in the car following Brooke's instructions, but it ended up getting too hot. She took her shoes off and stood outside for some air before tentatively walking inside the house to see what was going on. As soon as she went through the door, the first thing she saw was her grandmother Sherry with a bag over her head and her hands tied. She was still moving slightly. Before she had time to process anything, Austin appeared and pointed a gun at her and ordered that she leave with him. It is unknown where he was driving her or what, if any, conversations took place in his car. And Austin was now dead and couldn't answer for himself. So who was he and what did they know about him? 28-year-old Austin Edwards had joined the police academy in July 2021, and after graduating a year later, he went to Henrico County within the Richmond Division of Virginia. He resigned from the department after a couple of months, but no reason could be given for him leaving as it was not in his personnel file. A month after leaving, Austin was still associated with the Washington County Sheriff's Office and stepped into the Patrol Division as a Virginia State Deputy Sheriff. Little under 2 weeks before he drove to California, in a small town of less than 2,000 people, Austin had purchased a new home. Neighbors said he was friendly and they felt safe around him, knowing he was a police officer, feeling a certain level of protection from him. Austin spent a lot of time blacking out all the windows in his home, but less than 10 days after moving in, Austin Lee Edwards, the Winnecks and their pets would all be dead in another state. As the investigation was unraveling, over in Washington, one woman was scrolling aimlessly on Instagram when she landed on a picture that made her freeze. It was a photo of Austin. Not only was the story his face was attached to horrific, she had her own story from years ago. She had met Austin on Omega 2. He was 20, she just 13, and he had groomed, stalked, and harassed her for years. She almost threw up when she saw him. I read the whole story and it made me feel disgusting, she said. Seeing everything that had happened to the Winnick family over in California, the now 21-year-old took her story to the police and was able to offer up almost 4,000 messages between the pair from years ago. Austin had started off sweet and chatty, and she told him right away that she was 13, but this did not deter him from talking to her. He soon started asking for nude photographs and told her he loved her. He often spoke about hurting himself as a way of release. On one occasion, he insisted she join him on Skype. I can't yet, she told him. Why's that? He replied, because my mom, she said. Kill her. I'ma give myself a black eye, okay? He replied, listen, there's no obstacle that's gonna stop us from being together if that's what we both want. It doesn't even matter if you're 14 and not technically allowed to do shit yet, he said. She eventually cut ties with him, but this didn't stop him trying to get hold of her. Another thing that the messages brought to light was something serious that had happened in 2016. 2 weeks after the teen had told him she didn't want to talk to him, Austin had been detained for psychiatric evaluation after threatening to take his own life and kill his father. Police had been called to the home by Austin's dad, Christopher. They found him trying to restrain Austin on the kitchen floor, which was covered in blood, and Christopher had bite marks all over his arms. Police pulled out a taser, but Christopher said he could handle it, still trying to protect his son. Eventually, Austin was handcuffed, strapped to a stretcher, and checked into a hospital. He said he had had an argument with his girlfriend and was lashing out, his girlfriend being the 14-year-old who was trying to get away from him. Despite blocking him on every account, he made new ones and always found a way to reach her. The harassment went on for years until she was 18, when it all abruptly stopped. It is unknown whether this coincided with meeting the 15-year-old online, but investigations show the timings match up for this to be a possibility. Upon sending him to a mental health hospital in 2016, the judge said there was a substantial likelihood as a result of mental illness, He will, in the near future, seriously harm himself or suffer harm. The incident also prompted the judge to strip him of his gun rights. Under Virginia law, anyone who was held on a temporary detention order and later admitted to a treatment facility is not allowed to buy or possess a firearm until that right has been restored by the courts. His gun rights were never restored. On his application to the academy, Austin disclosed that he had voluntarily checked himself into a mental health facility, which meant he had to undergo a mental health evaluation and exam. He failed. Austin used his father, a close friend, and his Virginia State Police field training officer as references for the academy, and despite the failed evaluations and the fact the court had taken his gun rights away, he was still accepted. The Virginia State Police deliberately buried the results of this mental health examination, did no further examination into this aspect of Edwards' application, and hired him, notice said. The interim police chief for the Aurora, Colorado Police Department and a nationally recognized policing expert said, "I'd have to ask a lot of questions about why he's moving so quickly. That's pretty unusual for someone to go through academy and all of a sudden turn around and leave." He said most departments would be unlikely to hire Austin after such a brief work history unless he enrolled in their own police academy. With all of this coming to light, Michelle and her family wanted answers, but they weren't getting any. The Washington County Sheriff said, but the Virginia State Police said he didn't ever display any red flags. He was the nicest person and loved helping people in his job. They said he had no reprimands, no complaints, no instances of use of force levied, no internal investigations, and no disciplinary investigations. Michelle said that not one department ever apologized or even acknowledged them for a period of time. Eventually, Virginia State Police would issue a statement and say it was an isolated incident, adding, he wouldn't have been hired. Riverside Police Chief Larry Gonzalez said, "It's disturbing. It's disgusting. Anybody in the law enforcement community, we hate that person more than anybody because it's a reflection on us. This is yet another horrific reminder of the predators existing online who prey on our children. If you've already had a conversation with your kids on how to be safe online and on social media, have it again. If not, start now to better protect them." After all of these failings were highlighted, Governor Glenn Youngkin requested a full investigation be carried out by the state's watchdog agency. An agreement with the watchdog agency later allowed Virginia State Police to investigate themselves. Michelle and her family filed a notice of intent to sue in relation to the hiring process of Austin and the failures that had ensued. She said, "Want to know why this person was able to get hired by not one, but two agencies and given a firearm when he couldn't legally buy one?" Her attorneys said Austin's employers demonstrated negligence, gross negligence, negligent and gross negligent hiring, breach of mandatory duties, and other violations of Virginia state law. They argued that the family's damages exceeded $100 million. Even though Austin is now dead and cannot give anyone any information, police say they are continuing to look into his past, his laptop and his phones to determine if he has any more victims and piece together more of his story. But with so many pages of messages from only two people so far, police say they could be unraveling things for years and might never know the full truth. Mark, Sherry, and Brooke, along with their beloved pets, died in the most frightening of ways, terrified and trying to protect each other. Michelle said they all lived and loved selflessly. Mark was dearly loved by the kids he coached, and he left a big impact on many, with some saying he shaped their futures and what they wanted to do when they were older. He would always make sure he checked on them from time to see if everything was going well for them in college. The school paid tribute to him as well. His neighbor said he was someone that never stopped and loved being busy. He would offer to mow people's lawns to help them out and to pass the time. Sherry loved nothing more than being with her family. Celebrations like Thanksgiving and Christmas were her favorite times of year, when everyone could just be together and she would bake cakes and cookies for her children and grandchildren. "We had a family debate and it got heated on if the brownies my mom made should be frosted with sprinkles or just left plain," Michelle said. "Little did I know on that day would be the last time my husband and I would see my parents and sister again." Brooke was a single parent, and Michelle said her biggest joys in life were watching her two girls grow and collecting Starbucks cups. Michelle laughed. Brooke was telling everyone that her daughter had joined the color guard at school, and nothing made her prouder than watching her. For the girls and Michelle who were left behind, it is impossible to imagine how they must find each day. Celebrations such as birthdays, Christmas, and Thanksgiving will never be the same, and what should be such a happy time to be with each other will always serve as a painful reminder of what was taken from them. In a touching tribute, Price Court in Riverside was ceremoniously renamed Winnick Court and is placed next to the Winnick's home. Mark's nephew and godson said, "Mark and Sherry's pride and joy were their kids and by extension their grandchildren. You never saw them beam so brightly than when they were around their family." 20-year-old Heather was the oldest daughter of South Carolina natives Terry and Debbie Elvis. Extremely close to her parents and younger sister, her father later described the relationship saying, "We've always been a tight-knit family, where everybody does for everyone else." Heather had an especially close relationship with her father, and she communicated with him daily via text message, always fiercely independent. When she graduated from St. James High School in 2011 and wanted to move out of the family home to share an apartment with her best friend Brianna Worrellman, Terry and Debbie supported the decision fully. At the age of 20, Heather was working hard as a waitress in a Scottish-themed restaurant named the Tilted Kilt in Myrtle Beach, and was studying cosmetology to achieve her lifelong dream of being a full-time beautician. Her younger sister Morgan said of her sister's life goals, as well as being known for her creativity and ambitious streak, Heather was very popular and well-liked around town because of her warm, carefree, and positive nature. When people talk about Heather, they smile because she was so full of personality, a friend of Heather said. Another spoke lovingly of her, saying, "I would describe Heather as outgoing, free-spirited, loving life. She always wanted to live to the fullest." By the early summer of 2013, Heather had been sharing an apartment with her best friend Brianna in Myrtle Beach for around a year, and her studies and life were going great. However, this would all change when a chance meeting in the Tilted Kilt would ignite a chain of events that would end in tragedy. On a warm day in June, Heather was working the day shift in the bustling restaurant. She took orders, bussed tables, and chatted with patrons as usual. While bringing trays back into the kitchen, Heather bumped into 37-year-old father of three, Sidney Moorer, a local maintenance man who ran a small business, fixing malfunctioning kitchen appliances in the Myrtle Beach area. The pair got chatting and Heather was instantly smitten. Tweeting from her account, Moonchild, Heather hinted at her new crush on the maintenance man, saying, "I got a taste for men who were older." By the end of July, she had posted a number of sexually suggestive messages on social media, directed it to the guy who builds things at my job. Heather also often pointed out Sidney Moore to her friends and co-workers, telling them, "That's the guy." Sidney loved the attention from Heather and started to turn up at the restaurant more often to talk to her. And the pair were often seen giggling together in the kitchen whenever Sidney was called in to work on the appliances. By July, the relationship may have gone from an innocent crush to something more serious when Heather put out 2 status updates a minute apart on Twitter, hinting at a possible affair between her and Sidney. "Baby did a bad thing," she wrote, "and I'm in way too deep, but watch me get deeper." Most of Heather's co-workers were, by now, well aware of the 20-year-old's affections for Sidney, and rumors began to circulate about the pair's affair. One of Heather's co-workers later said, "Heather was made fun of a lot, and she was called multiple names by girls we worked with. One day, 2 of the girls decided to call the Tilted Kilt and pretend to be Tammy, Sidney's wife. In August, the rumors were seemingly substantiated when Sidney started hanging around the Tilted Kilt on his days off, often bringing Heather coffee and bagels or waiting around the back of the restaurant in his vehicle for Heather to finish her shift. The pair also began talking more openly with friends about the love affair, with Sidney even going so far as telling acquaintances he was considering employing Heather as a full-time nanny for his children when he and his wife possibly moved to Florida in the future. Heather also mentioned to her friends that Sidney had asked her to be the nanny for his children, which they all felt was strange considering they appeared to be having a sexual relationship. Heather and Sidney communicated via mobile phone constantly and would often drive their cars to remote and isolated locations to meet each other for sex. It was a toxic roller coaster of emotions for Heather. Sidney often told her he was unhappy with his wife and was planning on leaving her, which he never did. Heather's friends warned her that the older married man was stringing her along. By mid-September of that year, all of the secrecy and sneaking around had started to take its toll on her, and on September the 21st, it is believed that Heather attempted to bring an end to the affair, or the relationship shut down somehow, due to Heather tweeting, "Once upon a time, an angel and a devil fell in love." It did not end well. Things became even more toxic when Sydney's wife, 34-year-old Tammy, finally discovered the relationship and confronted Heather over the phone. According to Heather's housemate Brianna, who was present at the time of the phone call, Tammy belittled Heather and said that Sydney had just used her as a booty call. The enraged woman then made her husband speak to Heather on the phone. Brianna would later tell investigators that Sydney had shouted down the phone at Heather, "You were nothing to me. You were just someone who spread your legs." They basically tore Heather apart as a human being and who she was as a person and made her feel horrible about herself, Brianna added. And Sydney Moore's marriage was seemingly an extremely abusive one, with criminal prosecutor Chris Helms later telling reporters, "Tammy Moore was definitely the more domineering part of that couple. She told Sydney where to work, when to work, what to do. If I could classify Sydney as anything in that relationship, it would be utterly submissive." Chris Helms also stated that Tammy had been livid at the betrayal and wasn't content to simply end the young girl's relationship with her husband. She wanted to destroy Heather's life. It was also around this time that Tammy began handcuffing her husband to the bed at night to stop him from leaving while she slept. She also changed the passcode on his phone to a combination only she knew and bullied him into getting her name tattooed across his lower stomach, just above the crotch. Sydney had agreed to all of these extreme demands in the hopes of saving his marriage and keeping his family together. According to Brianna, Tammy's attacks didn't end with that phone call, but instead escalated into a full-on campaign of hate. Tammy even going so far as to continuously call Heather's workplace in an attempt to get her fired. Tammy was relentless. She would call off of Sydney's phone. She was sending pictures of her and Sydney performing sexual acts, videos of the two of them together. Heather sent a text message to Sydney begging him to make his wife stop the harassment, writing, "I lost Albers today because they sent me home after she kept calling." Heartbroken and devastated by the way she had been treated by the man she had fallen in love with and terrified by the constant attacks and harassment from his wife, Heather desperately tried to get her life back on track. She even started attending church again with best friend Brianna. When Tammy sent yet more aggressive and threatening messages to Heather in the beginning of November, saying, she also said Heather, by now mentally and physically exhausted by the ordeal, simply replied, "I think you're a little obsessed with me. I'm nobody you need to worry about anymore." Heather couldn't understand why Tammy wouldn't just leave her alone. The relationship with Sydney was over and she just wanted to forget about it all. Towards the end of November, just over 2 weeks after the last threatening text messages from Tammy, things finally started to look more positive for Heather. Sydney and Tammy had taken their 3 children on a 3-week road trip across California with their newly purchased Ford F-150 truck. With the Moores gone, Heather felt like she could momentarily relax and breathe again. There would be a reprieve from Tammy's constant harassment. That wasn't the only positive thing happening in Heather's life at that time too. She had managed to secure her dream job in a beauty salon as a makeup artist and was scheduled to start work just before Christmas. She was absolutely elated and couldn't stop talking about it with all of her friends and family. Heather was also extremely worried about something that had potential to make the whole situation with the Moores much, much worse. At the beginning of November, Heather, as well as her coworkers at the Tilted Kilt, had started to notice the 20-year-old gaining a significant amount of weight in a very short amount of time. Heather was extremely concerned that she had become pregnant by Sydney. Worried sick and frightened, she decided to take a pregnancy test at the restaurant with the help of her manager, Jessica Cook, who later told police that Heather was terrified of Tammy Moore. The pregnancy test came back as an error, however, and Heather remained unsure if she was carrying Sydney's baby or not. Heather's best friend later said, Heather had taken a pregnancy test while at work. I want to say it was at the beginning of November, and she at that time wasn't sleeping with anyone else other than Sydney. Despite all of her worries, by the winter of 2013, Heather, ever the optimist, decided it was finally time to move on with her life and start again. She hoped to find a new relationship, a happier and healthier one, and so she agreed to go on a first date with a man she had only been talking to for a short while, but who she had a really good feeling about, Steve Scaraldi. On the evening of December 17th, Heather and Steve met at around 10 p.m. and decided to drive around Myrtle Beach to check out the local Christmas illuminations in town. A little while later, they decided to head to a nearby parking lot where Steve taught Heather how to drive his manual vehicle. Heather excitedly sent a text message to her father and Brianna with a smiling photograph saying, "Just learned to drive stick. I'm a pro." After, Steve would later say that the pair had agreed to meet again for a second date. And then he dropped Heather off at her apartment in Carolina Forest at around 1:15 a.m. At around 1:45 a.m., Brianna, Heather's best friend, received a worrying phone call from Heather. She was hysterically crying and she said, "Sydney called me. My heart dropped because I was like, I thought we were past this." I said, "Why'd you answer?" And she said, "Because it wasn't his number." She told me that he said he had left his wife and that he was sorry and that he wanted to see her and be with her. And I got angry and said, "Don't do it. You're finally moving on with your life. You're happy again. You're yourself again. Why don't you sleep? Sleep on this and we'll talk about it first thing in the morning." And with that, the friends said their goodbyes. The following day, on the 19th of December, local police were dispatched to investigate a suspected abandoned vehicle, a green Dodge Intrepid, parked haphazardly on an isolated and remote riverside area named Peachtree Landing, approximately 8 miles away from Myrtle Beach and on the Wakamoe River. The stretch of riverfront was used as a landing area for small boats and was located at the bottom of a long and lonely stretch of road that rarely saw traffic. The car was locked, but police ran the vehicle's number plate through their registration system and came back with the name of the owner. The green Dodge Intrepid was registered to Terry Elvis, Heather's father. Terry Elvis was relaxing at home and watching television on the living room sofa when police officers knocked on his door to notify him about the discovery of the Dodge Intrepid. Confused and not being able to contact his daughter on her phone, he agreed to accompany the officers to Peachtree Landing to find out what was going on. When he spotted Heather's car parked unusually in the isolated area, he was shocked, but not initially concerned. He unlocked the vehicle with a spare key he had, allowed the officers to search it. He recalled, "I thought the car might have been stolen because of the way it was parked. Maybe somebody took it and left it there," he said. "It didn't really hit me, where's Heather?" Until the officers started looking through things. When the police couldn't locate Heather's purse, keys, or cell phone within the Dodge Intrepid, her father began to worry. He tried calling her again on her mobile phone, which appeared to be switched off, and then attempted to locate her at the Tilted Kilt, but was told by staff that she wasn't there and wasn't scheduled to work until the next day. Terry instantly knew that something was wrong. "This is totally out of the ordinary," he said. "Heather's never done anything like this before. Something's wrong." The Horry Police Department didn't think Peachtree Landing and the vehicle were crime scenes initially, as there was no broken glass, no signs of a struggle, and no blood in the area. However, they did open a missing persons case immediately, and officers and volunteers began searching the areas around Peachtree Landing, while divers combed the river. Human remains were discovered in the proximity of the boat landing. However, analysis later showed that these bones belonged to a male. With no physical evidence to go on, detectives began tracing Heather's movements on the 17th and 18th of December. Steve Scaraldi, the man who Heather had met on the night she was last seen, was brought in for questioning, but quickly cleared of all suspicion and released. To the shock of Heather's family and friends, who were putting out heartfelt and emotional pleas for information, as well as rewards, in the immediate aftermath of Heather's disappearance, Tammy Mora immediately jumped on social media to continue her hate campaign, publishing on Facebook a long diatribe that began, "While Sydney cheated on me in the months of September-October with a psycho whore who has since went missing." On December 20th, after being tipped off about the volatile love affair between Sydney and Heather by Heather's roommate Brianna, as well as a number of employees at the Tilted Kilt, police detectives brought Sydney in for questioning. Sydney was evasive and standoffish from the onset of the interviews. Sydney denied being anywhere near Peachtree Landing on the night of the 17th or the morning of the 18th. He insisted he hadn't had any kind of contact with Heather at all and, strangely, insisted he was driving around in his truck with his wife Tammy at the time to have sexual relations in public, which the pair had recorded on their phones. The experienced detectives felt that he was lying, They just needed the proof. When they began to examine Heather's call history and phone records, they got their first real breaks in the case and began piecing together her last known movements and how Sydney featured in those. On the morning of the 18th, just as Brianna had described, Heather had received a telephone call from a number she didn't recognize. She didn't recognize the number because it was placed from a public payphone. That telephone call lasted approximately 5 minutes, and Heather had frantically attempted to call the number back numerous times, starting from 1:35 in the morning. Heather dials the payphone back 9 times. The only reason she could possibly be calling that phone 9 times, that phone she's never heard of before, is to get the other person that just talked back on the line, an investigator would later say. Using Heather's phone records, the investigators traced the number to a phone booth located outside a gas station in Myrtle Beach. Security cameras picked up the images of someone using the payphone at the exact time the number called Heather's cell phone. When asked if he was the person who had called her, Sydney at first denied it. Tammy Mora was also taken in for questioning, where she discussed her marriage and denied being involved in Heather's disappearance. Following their suspicions, detectives decided to check all available local surveillance cameras and quickly came upon further highly incriminating evidence. A short time before making the telephone call, Sydney was captured again on surveillance cameras, purchasing a pregnancy test from a local Walmart. When asked if the pregnancy test was for Heather, he denied it and said it was for his wife. Even more damning evidence to come to light was video footage taken from cameras alongside the isolated stretch of road leading to Peachtree Landing. A dark Ford F-150 truck matching Sydney's had been captured heading towards the place Heather's car was discovered at 3:36 a.m. and then again recorded leaving the area at 3:46 a.m. Experts later testified that the truck was a 100% identical match to Sydney's. Sydney was the last person to speak to Heather, and he was, investigators believed, the last person to see her in Peachtree Landing. Using her phone data, investigators were also able to create a timeline of her phone's last known recorded movements. 2:30 a.m. Heather's phone again calls the phone booth that Sydney had called her from but receives no answer. Her phone then heads in the direction of Longbeard's Bar and Grill in Carolina Forest, near to her apartment, where it remains for around 15 minutes to a location named Augusta Plantation Drive. Heather's phone then returns to Longbeard's Bar and Grill, where it remains for a further 15 minutes. A call is made to Sydney's phone but goes unanswered. Her phone returns to her apartment, where it stays for 5 minutes. 3:25 a.m. Another call is made to Sydney's phone, which is answered and results in a 4-minute-long conversation. At 3:37 a.m., Heather's phone makes its way to Peachtree Landing, and 1 minute later 3 attempts are made to call Sydney's phone. All calls go unanswered. 3:41 a.m., another unsuccessful attempt is made from Heather's phone to reach Sydney's. 3:42 a.m., Heather's phone is apparently switched off. The location data coinciding with the surveillance images captured of Sydney's truck heading towards Peachtree Landing were extremely incriminating. Even more incriminating evidence came to light after investigators obtained a search warrant for the Moorers' home. The Moorers had suspiciously disposed of their home surveillance system on the 20th of December and installed a new one on the 21st. Investigators, unable to get their hands on the old system, confiscated the newer system and received video footage of both Sydney and Tammy Mora thoroughly scrubbing the passenger side of the truck and then burning the rags they had used to clean the vehicle on the same day they had installed the new home surveillance cameras. Finally, after several months, in February 2014, the police were able to announce a break in the case, a break that everyone had been waiting for. And it came as little surprise to many people that Sydney and Tammy Mora had been placed under arrest in connection with the disappearance of Heather Elvis. They were soon charged with kidnap, and despite there being nobody, they were charged with murder as well. They needed to find Heather, but the couple were saying nothing. As the Moras sat in custody, the police continued to build their case. Despite everything they were confident they had, they just didn't have enough to follow through with the murder charge against the pair. Tammy and Sydney no longer faced charges of murder in Heather's case, but the kidnap charges remained. Debbie said it was very disappointing that the murder charges had been dropped, but she also felt a little relieved that she would not have to sit through a murder trial and listen to everything they thought could have happened to her daughter play out. Heather's family also hoped that this might encourage people to come forward and talk. As the murder charges had now been dropped, the couple were able to post bail and go home as they awaited further developments and the pending trial for kidnap. Following their release and in spite of a gag order, the pair took to social media to protest their innocence, claim they had been framed, and Sydney Moorer even gave an emotional televised interview. Sydney's media appearances and failure to comply with the gag order would eventually land him in hot water. When he was jailed for 5 months for being in contempt and violating the Tammy publicly stated, "I feel like this town's going to crucify me because of all the lies that's happened." Months became years, and it was now 2017. Sydney Moorer was found guilty of obstruction of justice and sentenced to 10 years in prison. After this, it was now time for Sydney and Tammy to go on trial for the kidnap of Heather Elvis. And the media were out in force to report on what was now a highly publicized case with a lot of interest. It had now been 6 years since anyone last saw Heather, and after many witness testimonies, all the evidence and hours of court proceedings taking us to 2019, it was time for the verdict. Justice finally prevailed when Tammy and Sydney Moorer were both found guilty of the kidnap of Heather Elvis and sentenced to 30 years in prison. Sydney continued to insist he was innocent, telling the court that he couldn't give Heather's family closure. "If I could give them closure, I would. I have children of my own, I get it. There's just nothing I can give." As of the writing of this episode, Heather's body has never been found. In an effort to ensure that people will always remember Heather and draw attention to her case and other missing people, the Elvis family spends every June 30th, Heather's birthday, taping up missing persons flyers around town. They remain hopeful that at some point someone will talk, and maybe the answers about where Heather is will finally come to light. Debbie said persistence is key, and she would never give up her search for answers, not just for her own daughter, but for other missing people too. She says she knows the pain all too well and wants to channel her energy into making sure those in her position don't ever feel alone. The heartbreak of not knowing where Heather is best summed up by Debbie. As a mother, that child that was created in you, that you carried in your arms and put band-aids on, you just ache to hold your child again, and you think about what you could have done different, what you could have said that would have changed anything. But for our family and any other family that has a missing member, this is horrible, not knowing, not being able to take care of your child in any capacity whatsoever. They call it closure. I hate that word, but that's really what it is. Heather's heartbroken father, Terry, he continues to hope that one day she will be found. He said, "I hold out hope that I'll turn around one day at the front door and she'll walk in. Do I really think that'll happen? Deep down, no I don't, but I'll never give up." Our story begins in 1989 when on the 25th of March, Karen Downs and her husband Robert, known as Bob, welcomed their daughter Charlene. Charlene was their third child. She had 2 older sisters, Rebecca, known as Becky, and Emma. Charlene was later followed by the youngest of the Downs children and the only son, Robert. Charlene was described as a music and animal lover, someone who was close to her siblings with a cheeky and funny side. Bob and Karen had married on the 2nd of May, 1987 at a church in Hillfields, just north of Coventry city center. Hillfields is one of the more deprived areas of the city, with antisocial behavior and crime being common problems. Life in the Downs household could be described as chaotic or dysfunctional, and run-ins with the police and social services would happen. Those who knew the couple made allegations that Bob was addicted to alcohol and could show serious levels of violence and aggression towards his children. The court document from 1989 showed that the family had been under investigation by social services and West Midlands police, and it was found that a convicted rapist had had 3-year-old Emma in their car without supervision and had also been in the Downs family home. Bob was given the advice that the person in question should not be allowed into the family home again. But this didn't happen, and Bob continued to have drinks with the individual in the pub. The police conducted a video interview with Emma in the hope it would unveil something more, but she disclosed nothing. She would later move out of the family home and in 1993 moved in with her grandfather and his wife. After Emma moved back to the family home in 1997, allegations of sexual assault were made against a family friend, allegations also made by Charlene. The friend was allegedly trusted by the family to take the children to school in the morning, and a report from social services states that it was believed Karen and Bob were aware of the abuse but failed to act. When Charlene was 9 years old, an allegation was made that a friend of her parents had forced themselves on her. Now, at the risk of the children being removed from the home and taken into the care of social services and the potential prosecution for neglect. In 1999, the family moved out of Coventry and up north to Blackpool. For many, Blackpool brings back memories of the illuminations, arcades, and ice creams on the beach. During the day, the piers, promenade, and beach are full of tourists looking for some time away. Home to the Blackpool Tower and the Tower Ballroom, many a famous face has performed in the town, everyone from Frank Sinatra to the Beatles. Thousands of people visit Blackpool every year during the summer months and tourist season, especially for the illumination switch on. But behind the bright lights lies a very different town. A large proportion of those who live there live in deprived areas, and it is the sixth most deprived authority in England. There are high amounts of unemployment, and the death rate of those who die from alcohol-related deaths is the highest in England. There are also high levels of poverty, and the town is the 12th poorest area in the whole country. As concerns over the welfare of the children continue to grow, Charlene, Emma, and Becky were placed in foster care, after they said they no longer wanted to be at home. This placement did not last for an extended period of time, and the children were returned to the house. In 1999, Becky Downs alleged that her father was violent, and social services said they were going to take it to court to try and obtain a prosecution. By the end of 1999, the children were put on the at-risk register, and it was reported that domestic violence was present in the home. One of Charlene's friends, Martin, said he not only saw Bob's violence, but also predators at the Downs house. By early 2000, at the age of 11, Charlene was staying at different homes and told the workers from social services that she was being beaten by her parents, showing them bruises. In March of that year, Charlene's school began to raise concerns that she was failing to attend classes and wasn't coming to school. Her parents said they didn't know where she was, as she stayed with many different people. A few months later, in June, Charlene was examined by the hospital, and based on what it found, it was suspected that she was the victim of sexual abuse. She made the allegation that her father had become violent and thrown her across the room. Following this, she disappeared for 2 days. Over the course of a 12-month period, Charlene would make 13 visits to a sexual health clinic with her grandmother. She had bruising on her body, including her inner thigh. Social services spoke to Bob about their concerns that Emma had been seen with older men in the family home, and Bob later moved out to appease those from social services. He moved to Buchanan Street in September and took Charlene and her brother Robert out of the care of social services and against the wishes of the authorities. As 2001 rolled around, social services suspected that a male was in the family home and sharing a bed with Charlene. In April of that year, there were more allegations made by Becky and Charlene regarding Bob's excessive drinking and the men he used to bring to the house and the inappropriate sexual advances these men would make. Charlene allegedly told a social worker that one of her father's friends had touched her inappropriately when health visitors made a visit to the family home in August. Charlene was found in bed with a much older man, as she counted some money, but Bob and Karen said he was just a family friend. 1 month later, Becky would move out. Over a period of 15 years, 16 men who had committed a variety of offenses against minors had access to the family homes, both in Coventry and in Blackpool. Bob and Karen denied letting predators stay at their home. Bob would drink at various pubs in and around Blackpool. During one of his visits to the pub, he met a man called Ray Monroe, and he invited him back to the house. Ray Monroe would end up staying at the property. Monroe is a convicted sex offender with 4 counts of sexual assaults against young girls, and he was sentenced to 4.5 years in prison. Karen and Bob said they were unaware of this and only found out when the details came out in court. They said they believed he had raped an ex-girlfriend, information which did not stop them from allowing him into their home. One of Bob's friends, Glenn, claimed he saw Bob invite various men from the pub back to his house and that he had seen Charlene sitting on Monroe's lap. He said he voiced his concerns about seeing this and said that it wasn't right. In 2003, Charlene visited a walk-in health center 3 times. Karen claimed to be unaware of Charlene going to the health clinic and also unaware of the predators staying in her home. Despite moving to a different part of the country, it seemed that not much had changed and family life was still fractured and difficult. November 3, 2003. The police conducted a search of the family home and found nothing relating to Charlene or anything that gave any clues as to where she might have gone. They needed to work backwards. What follows is a timeline of what is believed to be Charlene's last known movements, although the details of this remain debated and there are differing opinions as to where she went that night. As part of this documentary, we went to Blackpool and met with Renee Crompton, who runs the Justice for Charlene Downs campaign. She walked us through the route that Charlene is believed to have taken that night. This timeline is also compiled using the timeline issued by Lancashire Police. But again, it's important to remember that the details do differ. The 1st of November 2003. At 3:25 p.m., Charlene and Becky were walking down Bank Hay Street to get to the Coral Island Arcade. Charlene's friend Tasha corroborated this and said she had seen her there too. According to the police timeline, Charlene returned to the family home before going back out later in the evening. It is believed that Charlene and Becky went to the McDonald's close to the promenade later that evening. The pair then headed to Church Street and walked up it at around 6:45 p.m. It's alleged that they met with Karen Downs as she handed out leaflets for the restaurant she worked at, which was located on Church Street. Charlene then headed to a phone box on Leopold Grove before saying goodbye to her mother and going off with her friends. It's reported that Karen Downs gave them money. According to the police timeline, Charlene stayed with her friends for a while before setting off to Corn Street, and the details of what she did in the following hour are not known. But according to the police, she met another friend. Charlene and her friend Tyne went to the Carousel Bar at 9:30 p.m., where Tyne said men bought the pair drinks before Tyne lost sight of her. She said she never saw Charlene again. This does differ from the police timeline, which says they went back into town before going their separate ways near Abingdon Street and Talbot Street at 11 p.m. The last claimed sighting of Charlene was in an alleyway off of Abingdon Street at 11 p.m. This alleyway is somewhat notorious in Blackpool, various takeaways back onto it, and young girls in the town would often use the alley to go into the shops via the back doors, later returning with things like money and cigarettes. Charlene had been expelled from school, and as she was now lacking in structure and routine, she would spend more time in the town center and in the alleyway. As the investigation continued, there was no sign of Charlene Downs. Missing persons posters were put up and people were hoping for any news of her whereabouts. But the investigation soon stalled, and the leads were proving fruitless. Then a year later in November 2004, someone would come forward and the case would take a dramatic turn. A man called David Cassidy came forward to the police with a disturbing story to tell. David Cassidy owned a local business that supplied slot machines to shops in the area. He said that a man called Tariq had claimed his brother, Ayed Al-Batiki, had confessed to murdering Charlene, and that another man called Mohammed Raveshir helped him to cover it up. Mohammed Raveshi had been born in Iran before moving to the UK. He owned and operated Funny Boys fast food on Dixon Road, which is how he knew David Cassidy. One of his employees was his friend and tenant, Ayed Al-Batiki, who was originally from Jordan. This was the break that the police had been looking for. They asked David if he would wear a concealed microphone and talk to Tariq again to ensure that the conversation was recorded. David agreed. In the recording, Tariq is heard saying he never said those things, adding that it was bullshit. The police would later insist they had never seen or heard this recording. In January 2005, the police conducted a search of the home of Mohammed Raveshir, but nothing of note was found. On the 22nd of February, Mohammed and Ayed were brought in for informal questioning, and whilst this was taking place, wiretaps were put in place to record conversations. As part of a covert operation. During the operations, Mohammed could be heard speaking to somebody about David Cassidy. They joked that he should be killed and then turned into a kebab. Mohammed's friend says, "You have a kebab shop, sell it." Mohammed laughs and replies, "Yeah, make a fake little kebab." While the police were conducting their covert operations, a woman whose identity is protected said she had gone into Funny Boys for a coffee after having a few drinks at another establishment. She said she had then woken up in the upstairs flat. She was on a bed with no clothes on. She could not recall how she had come to be in the flat or why she was naked. She said she quickly got dressed and ran out of the building down the alley. She stated she heard a man calling out to her and asking her to come back. When she looked back at him, she said he was holding some money in his hand. She went to the police to report the incident, and the police allegedly told her that the person responsible was Ayed Al-Batiki, and that he had raped her and filmed it. The woman also claimed that 2 police officers, Jan Besant and Don Fraser, asked her to make claims that she couldn't be sure were true. She refused and her case was dropped. No investigation was undertaken and charges were not filed. Covert recordings were made over 4 weeks and produced 52 CDs in total. However, officers would later describe the recordings as too distorted to use. One of the officers working on the case was Jan Besant, a detective sergeant. She offered to transcribe the tapes and would spend the next 2 years doing this. As well as running the takeaway business, Mohammed used to be a foster father for vulnerable children in Blackpool. Jan Besant questioned one of Mohammed's former foster daughters, and she confirmed that there was nothing untoward about him and offered no incriminating or otherwise suspicious stories about him. However, one of Mohammed's ex-foster daughters would later accuse him of sexual assault. Mohammed also lived 2 doors down from Don Fraser. He was also working on Charlene's case. Mohammed alleged that Don's wife had said that Don had difficulty performing in the bedroom and that she had made a pass at Mohammed. Mohammed said he turned her down and this situation was the root cause of Don's issues with him and their falling out. This story was very different from Don's. Don later claimed that his relationship with Mohammed had fallen apart after hearing that Mohammed had shown a pornographic video to underage girls in his home. He added that his wife had never liked Mohammed. These are allegations that Mohammed refuted. With still no sign of Charlene, the police changed their strategy. This was no longer a missing persons case. This was now a murder inquiry. 17th of March 2006. It was reported that 2 people had been arrested. Ayed Al-Batiki had been charged with murdering Charlene Downs and Mohammed Raveshar was charged with helping him dispose of her body. In May 2007 at Preston Crown Court, Mohammed Raveshar and Ayed Al-Batiki went on trial. The prosecution claimed that either Mohammed or Ayed had been having a sexual relationship with Charlene, and that if the police had found out, they would have been in trouble. But both men said they didn't even know her, let alone have a sexual relationship with her. However, multiple people would later state that they had seen Charlene behind the counter at the takeaway shop, as well as experiencing inappropriate behavior. Emma Downs described IAD as a creep, and said she had seen him behaving badly in nightclubs towards young girls. The police also claimed that there had been multiple allegations of sexual assault lodged against IAD. Mohammed's house had been searched extensively, carpets and floorboards were removed, and the property was gone through with a fine-tooth comb. No DNA evidence was found. The police said that the house had been cleaned, but Mohammed argued that there was no evidence for them to find there in the first place. The defense requested that the audio recording of the conversation between David and Tariq be submitted, only to be told it couldn't be found. The court then ordered that the police needed to find the audio and give it to them. And CD was subsequently found, but it had a huge scratch on it, and as a result the police said they believed it wouldn't be playable. Jan Bazin would later claim that if the audio CD had been properly declared, approval would not have been given to search Mohammed's home, nor to putting the recording devices in place. Don Fraser's account had been the one to enter the audio CD of the conversation with Tariq into the system. But he said this was not him and that he had been framed by someone else using his PC and logon details. He would later say, during the proceedings, the covert recordings were played to the court and the transcriptions made by Detective Sergeant Jan Besant were the captions. Claims were made during the trial that after Charlene had been murdered, her body had been dismembered and put into kebabs in the takeaway, and that her bones had been crushed up and put into the grouting. There is no evidence for either of these things happening. This narrative has been pushed and repeated when discussing Charlene's case in spite of the lack of evidence to back it up, reducing Charlene to nothing more than a cruel urban legend. After the defense and prosecution presented their cases, it was time for the jury to deliberate. After 49 hours of discussions, they had failed to come to a verdict. As a result, the jury was formally discharged. On the 15th of September that year, a memorial was held for Charlene, which was funded by the far-right British National Party. An inquiry was also set up by the Independent Police Complaints Commission, and it found that the investigation into Charlene's disappearance was handled unprofessionally. This led to 2 officers facing disciplinary action, and one of them subsequently being cleared of any wrongdoing. In April 2008, a retrial was ordered, but this would soon come to a grinding halt and later totally collapse. The Crown Prosecution Service, upon re-examining the evidence, found that there were serious issues with the evidence presented, that they had grave doubts about how reliable some of the evidence was. The covert recordings were criticized for their poor quality, and the accuracy of the transcriptions made by Jan Besant was described as low. Mohammed Raveshi's lawyer John Bromley Davenport said that Detective Sergeant Besant was not qualified to listen to and transcribe the tapes. An expert would later re-examine the audio tapes of the covert recordings after they had been played to the court, and they too said they were not of a good enough quality to be evidence. It also found that some of the transcriptions were different words. For example, one phrase was transcribed as burial place, but it was argued what had actually been said was Paul's place. The tracker that had been put onto Muhammad's car then showed him going to see one of his friends, who was named Paul. Forensic audiologist Elizabeth McClellan said that Jan Besant's transcripts should not have been used during the trial. She said this is a classic case of cognitive priming. The evidence presented by Jan Besant was potentially misleading. It's extremely important that when recordings are transcribed, that the person transcribing them has no prior awareness at all about that evidence. In this case, it shows several signs that she was subject to bias and influenced by the events that she was investigating. Both men were subsequently released. The charges against Ayed and Muhammad were dropped. They were acquitted and given £250,000 in compensation. Muhammad indicated upon his release that he would potentially sue the police force, describing what had happened to him as shameful, having spent more than 2 years on remand in prison. Muhammad said that David Cassidy, who had made the statement that had led to the police looking into him and Ayed, had worked for him at one point, but he had been forced to let him go as he was bad at his job. David was enraged by being fired and proceeded to harass Muhammad as well as vandalize the shop. Tensions reached a boiling point when the pair ended up having a physical altercation. It was after this that David gave his statements to the police regarding what had allegedly been said to him. In 2011, Jan Besant was found guilty of 2 counts of misconduct and was forced to resign from the police force. Lancashire Police said her conduct had let everyone down. The IPCC Commissioner for the Northwest, Nassim Malik, said, was abundantly clear that the covert recordings and the investigation had been handled poorly and unprofessionally. Superintendent Simon Giles said that the police expect the highest professional standards from all our staff, and the panel has found that this individual's conduct has fallen well short of these standards. The ruling that Jan Besant be forced to resign was later overturned by the British Arbitration Tribunal, and they said she should be reinstated. The years would pass, tourists would come and go, and the town would carry on. But there was still no sign of Charlene Downs. It had now been 8 years since Charlene had vanished from the streets of Blackpool. The police looking into her case found that more than 60 teenage girls had been the victims of grooming by people working in various takeaway shops throughout the town. Charlene's friend Tasha said that she had seen grooming in Blackpool firsthand and had also been groomed. Charlene's friend Martin and another friend Sean said that they had witnessed Charlene going into takeaway shops and then coming back out with cigarettes, money, or alcohol. Charlene's friend Tyne said that she too would go into the alleyway and trade sexual contact for drugs, cigarettes, money, and alcohol. Tyne said on the occasion she went to the alleyway with Charlene, Charlene would act as a lookout in case the police came, and Tyne would give her money for doing this. Paige Chivers was a 15-year-old girl who went missing from Blackpool 4 years after Charlene. Robert Ewing was later convicted and sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 33 years. He had murdered her after she had threatened to go to the police and tell them about the sexual contact he had had with her. Ewing, a self-confessed neo-Nazi, had been previously convicted for gross indecency and indecent assault against a 12-year-old girl. In 2014, a Crime Watch appeal was launched and a reward for any fruitful information was offered, totaling £100,000. In 2016, a cold case team was brought on board to examine Charlene's case, and they found CCTV that had previously not been released to the public. It showed Charlene and Becky walking on the day Charlene had gone missing. It was released to the public in November of that year to try and generate any new leads, and a Crime Watch appeal was issued again on the 13th anniversary of her going missing. In 2017, Karen and Bob Downs sued Lancashire police over their handling of their daughter's case and the CCTV footage. August 2017, an arrest was made. A man was taken into custody on suspicion of the murder of Charlene Downs. Nigel had worked as a chef, and a restaurant he worked at in Blackpool appeared on an episode of Ramsay's Kitchen Nightmares. Clubway 41. Nigel Lloyd had attacked two 15-year-old girls in Blackpool in 2001 and 2003. He was convicted of these in 2017 and sentenced to 64 months, more than 5 years, in prison. The flat Nigel was living in overlooked the alleyway Charlene would often be seen in, and where she had allegedly been on the night she disappeared. Tyne said she knew Nigel Lloyd and referred to him as a creep. He also knew Charlene and her family. He was released after 2 days without charge, and no charges have ever been filed against him in relation to Charlene's disappearance. In November 2018, Bob and Karen appeared on The Jeremy Kyle Show, a controversial British talk show where guests would appear to resolve conflicts, take lie detector tests and DNA tests. There would be frequent confrontations and arguments on stage. Bob Downs later said they had appeared on the show to discuss Charlene's case, but it quickly devolved into talking about their marriage and marital problems. Also that year, Karen Downs released a book called Sold in Secret, talking about Charlene and her disappearance. In 2021, Charlene's brother Robert tragically passed away. He was found in a pool of blood by Bob on the 4th of December at 11:30 p.m., a few hours before he had complained he felt unwell. His family said he had been left deeply affected by the disappearance of his sister and had never been able to properly process or recover from it. At an inquest, it was ruled he had died of an accidental drugs overdose. It also came out that Bob and Karen did not call the ambulance for 3 hours. They said after finding him, they had fallen into a state of panic and anxiety. The ambulance wasn't called until nearly 3 o'clock in the morning. In November the following year, Charlene's friend Tyne died at the age of 32. An inquest found her death was drug-related. In 2023, the case was reopened by the Leeds Trinity University Cold Case Unit teamed up with Renee in the hopes of finally solving Charlene's case. Renee said, "Our main aim is to review Charlene's case and see where the failings are and go out to get new evidence." Blackburn Uni also approached us to undertake a large child sexual exploitation project for the whole of Lancashire to find out the scale of the problem and where children are being failed. Bob and Karen said they have been verbally abused and taunted by locals after it came out that Raymond Rowe and other predators had stayed at their house. Bob again asserted he didn't know Raymond Rowe was a pedophile. They remain living in Blackpool. Unfortunately, Charlene's story is not unique. There are a plethora of young people who constantly fall through the cracks, and the people that should be there to catch them aren't. An internal police report would state that 11 takeaway shops in Blackpool town centre had been involved in sexually exploiting young girls. As reported by the BBC, the Times newspaper conducted an investigation that found the police initially had 100 people of interest due to how many people were believed to be abusing and exploiting Charlene. And that brings us to today. Today marks the 20th anniversary of Charlene's disappearance, and there are still more questions than answers. The investigation into what happened to her is one of the longest running in Lancashire, with 2,500 statements being taken and more than 3,000 people being spoken to. This is about getting justice for a 14-year-old girl. She was someone who had already gone through so much in such a short period of time, and the least we can do is continue to fight for her. As Renee said, Charlene was failed by everyone that should have kept her safe. The police, social services, they all let her down. We're trying to build a legacy and fight for real justice for her, so she can be remembered for something positive. It is our hope that those who know more will come forward with the truth. Her whereabouts will finally be made known and justice will be served. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the depths of unsolved mysteries. Cold cases not only challenge our understanding of the past, but also ignite our curiosity and determination for answers. Remember to subscribe to stay updated on our latest investigations. And if you have any information regarding the cases we've covered, don't hesitate to reach out. Together, we can shed light on the shadows of the past and bring closure to those who seek it. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay curious, and never stop seeking the truth.